What is good, folks? Welcome back to the Civo DevOps Bootcamp. This is the last session. Super excited for this one. If you're new, we have done an entire series on this, so make sure you check out the playlist section of Civo YouTube channel on which you're watching this right now. We have Kai over here with us. Thanks a lot for joining, Kai. Kai and
Yeah.
me have a lot of similarities. We both are developer advocates. We both work at Civo, and we both are wearing caps right now. So, all right. So today we're talking about. Before we move forward, Kai, would you like to tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, if you've watched the entire series so far, you will have seen my face. My name is Kai. I work as a developer advocate, like Kunal said, over here at Civo. And yeah, hopefully going to make you a little bit smarter about Kubernetes and K3s today.
Yep. Not many hard prerequisites for this session if you already know basics of Kubernetes, because we already have covered that in the previous lectures. But yeah, let's get started with this. Just give people a general overview who might not be familiar with the architecture about how Kubernetes works.
Yep. So I've got a slideshow here that if you want to pull up, Kunal. Cool. Hopefully you can see that. Let's see what happens if I press present. Yay. Right. No, that's...
By the way, for everyone else who has joined, feel free to ask your questions in the live chat.
Yes.
There's some misconceptions people may have regarding K3s and its use cases. We are trying to share about what the differences and similarities and how we use it at Civo, for example. And yeah, feel free to ask your questions live, and we'll try to answer those. Just some last minute.
Yeah, sorry. I'm trying to pull up the slide. So the slideshow should be showing because it's showing. Here we go. Boom. Right, Kunal, if you can pull that up. Sorry about this.
That looks good.
Right. Yeah. So what we're gonna do is look at Kubernetes overview and then look at sort of K8s. K3s. So this is K8s, which is like the full Kubernetes, and then K3s, which is lightweight Kubernetes. We're going to look at some differences, but also some similarities. So in previous sessions, we have talked a little bit about Kubernetes, but we're just going to quickly talk about what the structure of the Kubernetes cluster is. So yeah, everything works in Kubernetes in terms of a cluster, which is composed of a control plane and then nodes. And the sort of control plane runs the Kubernetes API, which is responsible for communicating with and to the individual worker nodes. It has a scheduler and a key value store, which in K8s is etcd. And the control plane is a separate function, and then the nodes are separate, usually on virtual machines, and those individually run a kubelet, which is responsible for actually running the sort of the containers themselves in pods, and the Kubernetes proxy, which manages networking between pods and into the cluster itself, or between the cluster and then the outside world. This is from the official Kubernetes documentation, so definitely check that out if you are unfamiliar. So then let's look at K3s a little bit. Compared to
The figure is broken a little bit.
Oh no, okay.
I think.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Right.
Some
so
people
let's-
are asking, is this bootcamp enough to get started? To be quite frank, no. That's the right answer, because you need to have like a lot of hands-on practice. There's a lot of other things that go into, like the DevOps thing. So we already talked about what is DevOps and stuff. It's like a, once you get into it, it's like a, everything. I don't know if I should be saying it's a never-ending cycle, because tools keep coming. So even if you check out Anaisis channel, she's making 100 days of Kubernetes. She does so many amazing content and so many tools and things and practices and all these other things. So it's definitely enough to get you started, but you would have to definitely explore. I can try sharing. Just give me a
Yeah,
second.
in case it was my computer playing silly buggers. Yeah, so
Yeah,
just
I
to
can.
sort of go off of what Kunal was saying, is this is intended to be like a bit of a crash course boot camp type of thing. You're watching this, you're sort of just immersing all of it. But this is this is designed to be a starting off point. If you want to learn more about Kubernetes itself and sort of using it, you can check out the Civo Academy, which is at
Yes.
civo.com/academy.
Yep.
So that is free to sign up and free to view. And then if you want to use run it on the Civo platform, then you can just you would need a credit card just to actually launch your clusters.
Yeah.
Right.
But in
Okay.
order to like watch the lectures, you don't need to add a card. But if you are trying out which is highly recommended, if you're trying out like multi-node infrastructures and stuff, definitely recommend it. Plus, you'll get $250 of free credit.
Yes.
Plus, Civo is great. Yeah, if you want to learn about Kubernetes, I would recommend Civo highly. It's
Well,
also
we
cheaper options and stuff. It's very fast, simplicity. But yeah, we can talk about that all day.
right. Yeah. So was the first image broken as well? This one, that if people couldn't see that one. But yeah, that's
I
the
think this one was broken as well. Yeah, because I could
okay.
see this entire slide over.
Oh, that's a shame. Oh,
Mm.
my computer's being silly. Sorry about that. Right. Okay. So this is the K8s the sort of overview of how clusters are organized, and you can see that the control plane is an entirely separate thing from your nodes. And this is a conscious sort of division of labor where the control plane is just concerned with scheduling work and not performing any of your containerized workloads. And specifically in Kubernetes like this, there's a cloud provider API, which you can see in the top right corner, which communicates, which is sort of bundled in so that you can use it on whatever sort of cloud provider, whether it's one of the big three or another one. There's sort of cloud provider specific things that are always bundled in to K8s. But yeah, so the idea is that the nodes are the places where containerized workloads are run, and the control plane has the responsibility for scheduling this work onto the nodes as their availability. If you go forward to the next slide, we're just going to contrast that with K3s. So K3s is a simplified version of Kubernetes. And what that means is that it sort of strips out a whole bunch of things, of those bundled in things that K8s Kubernetes has, the full distribution has. So K3s is a distribution of Kubernetes. So the way that I like to think about it, if you're familiar with Linux distributions, is that there's your Ubuntu distribution, which has a bit of everything, but then you have the extremely lightweight distributions that are designed to run on sort of super lightweight machines or perform a specific task. And Anubhav has just
Yeah,
asked a
a
really
great question.
exactly sort of on this. If you have low RAM on whatever machine that you're handling or you're sort of learning Kubernetes on, K3s, you won't at least learn the basics. You'll learn everything, right?
Yeah,
K3s is a great way to run Kubernetes sort of on lower end machines.
yeah.
Um,
You can do everything you want with K8s with K3s.
Yes. So the idea with K3s is that it came out from Rancher Labs originally, who are now part of SUSE, and their idea was to kind of have a distribution of Kubernetes that did all the things that it needs to do, but nothing extra. Right? You're not bundling in all this like other things that you may need, but mostly won't. Right? So it has all the things that you need to run Kubernetes, but it just makes a couple of sort of opinionated choices, right? So it bundles in components that you will need to run your cluster. And if you are not familiar with these terms of ingress, container runtime, virtual networking, service discovery, there is tons of documentation around this, both on the Civo website and elsewhere. But the idea is that with K3s, you don't have to worry about whether your cluster setup has these. It automatically does, right? So when you run the K3s start command, it spins up, and if you go back one slide, Kunal, it spins up this sort of this one. It spins up the server and the agent to run together. So instead of having a separate control plane node, you are able to have a single node cluster. Now, it's not a cluster in the sense that it has multiple physical nodes somewhere, but it's able to perform work and run the control plane process together. And some of the decisions that they've made are visible in this image. For example, the key value store, which is the thing that stores the state of all the things in your cluster, what's running where, what's being scheduled, what node is running what, is etcd in full Kubernetes, but in K3s, it's by default is SQLite, which is a sort of very lightweight database.
But in K3s, like you can also replace it with something more powerful, like you can even add like etcd, MySQL, Postgre, but in K8s, I think you're only allowed etcd. So that's also another great.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, to sort of, if you go back, if you go forward to the opinionated slide, so all of these things are proven to work together. But if you wanted to swap something out, you're able to. So, nothing's stopping you from using a different ingress controller or a different key value store for your control plane in K3s. You're able to do that, but it's a sort of, you need to know what you're doing by that point situation. So if you were doing this for yourself, onto a cluster of that you run, you're happy, you can change any part of these components and see what happens. But the idea is that they have, like they're designed to work on a small footprint and possibly even on a single machine. So if you go forward one more slide, Kunal. K3s is physically lightweight in that downloading the whole sort of binary, the single program that runs, weighs in at less than 100 megabytes. And the way that it achieves that is it strips out some of those cloud API components, other container runtimes, so it only has container D, some storage, like cloud provider specific storage things, which they're not needed for it because it's when Darren and his team made K3s, they kind of had this idea of like, well, we know that we like to use these. We know that these parts work well together, and they're compatible with the wider world. So we can take all the rest of it out, right? And then the idea is that you allow the two processes, both the sort of the server and the agent, to communicate to each other via the what they call the tunnel proxy, which allows the control plane node to do work if needed. However, and this is important to know, when I say lightweight, is yes, you can run K3s on a machine that has, say, 512 megabytes of RAM. But the moment you add workloads to it, if you're running them on the same machine, you're going to increase that memory requirement. So, it's not magic in the sense that, oh, it'll run any workload on any machine. It just makes very clever decisions to allow you to run sort of workloads on smaller machines than you might otherwise need to. And yeah, so there's some common misconceptions, right? I've touched on these. K3s, you sometimes hear it like, oh, it's like it's a limited type of Kubernetes. It's not. It has all the features of Kubernetes. So K3s is a Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF, sandbox project. And in order to be accepted into the CNCF like that, you have to prove that you're entirely like compatible with whatever the structure that they determine is. So whatever you throw at like if it runs on Kubernetes, you're able to run it on K3s. So it's not lightweight on features. It's just lightweight in terms of the sort of power and memory requirements that it needs.
And we use it here as well, right? So that's an example.
Yeah,
You
so
can run it in production.
yes, we do. So if you spin up a cluster on the Civo Kubernetes service, it's actually going to start you a K3s cluster. And that means, it means two main things. It means extremely fast startup times because it's a single sort of binary that we're effectively starting, connecting to your account, boom, like serving it out. But the other part is that because it bundles in all the components, you're able to just throw work at it, and it will just pick up and go like, cool, here's a container image. I'm going to schedule it in this pod on this node, and off we go. And so the idea being that you're able to sort of get from 0 to 100 very quickly with any workload that you might have, as long as it's packaged in containers. So yeah, it's not just for like hobby projects or whatever. We use it in production. I know people who use K3s clusters in like real world production scenarios, but it's equally good for that, as well as that question that was asked earlier, which is, can I run it locally to learn about Kubernetes? So it's a little bit of like a silver bullet kind of thing.
Some people ask this question, and this question was asked like previously when I was doing a similar talk. They were asking like, hey, so you're using K3s and stuff. Now, what if I am on the learning journey? So I'm learning about stuff. So they were asking this question, does learning Kubernetes make sense? I mean, obviously it does, because the concepts are similar, but it's just like you can definitely learn, you can use K3s while learning Kubernetes. That's what I'm saying. But what are your views on this, like Kai?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would say is it's actually learning Kubernetes with K3s is useful, and there's a real world example of this. So the deprecation in Kubernetes of the Docker shim, which is the way that Kubernetes sort of handles Docker or uses Docker as a container runtime, that's being removed. Well, if you learned your Kubernetes using K3s, you're basically future-proofed because you're using the Open Container D runtime anyway, right? So if you learn to debug that and to manage that, you didn't even have to worry about, like, what's this going to do to my understanding? Like, you can still use Docker containers with K3s. It just happens to run them on Container D, right? And once you learn these sort of basics of intra-cluster networking and service discovery and everything else, they're all the same in different with the different components. So your configuration files for ingresses might look slightly different if you're using Nginx ingress controller or traffic, but the concepts are the same. So it's different flavors.
Yeah, there's another good question on the screen. Let me just point that. What are some of the differences that the end users will face between K3s and K8s? I think more differences will be faced by the providers themselves, right? Because if you have like so many extensions, for example, in your in your Kubernetes, so because K3s removes all of those extensions, so I think it's not going to affect the end customers, but like the service provider. Kai, what do you think?
One of the things, like, it's a consideration, right? So if you have a Kubernetes cluster that you've run on Kubernetes, as in K8s, in a different cloud provider, you might not be able to sort of directly port the configuration and just have it sort of work in in K3s or even a different cloud provider using K8s, right? So because these sort of configuration differences are sort of matter, right? But in terms of if you went the other way of like if you had something configured in K3s, you could very easily expand that upwards, right? But yeah, so there are differences for providers. So like Civo, for example, we have made some decisions to make sure that we can run your Kubernetes clusters in a certain way. Storage, for example. So persistent storage is managed differently in a K3s cluster than it is in some types of full Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah.
So K3s uses CSI, which is the container storage interface, and it's just like it's considerations that you might have to make, but you're able to eventually, like you are able to do these configurations to make sure that whatever workload you have does work on either.
Yeah. There are a few questions on the screen. Let me just put it. So this was answered, and how can I keep a container running in Kubernetes?
Hmm. Um, like if you schedule a container to
Yeah,
run in a pod, unless you're terminating that pod or otherwise affecting it, it it'll
that
it'll
abstraction
run.
is the beauty. You don't have to worry about it. Like if some other pods or things go down, it's automatically going to scale it. So yeah,
Yeah, actually that's a really good point, Kunal, about abstraction. Is a little bit of what K3s does is it abstracts away some of the sort of Kubernetes hardness, right? So kind of like just to go back to the fact that it sort of makes some decisions for you about like, well, here's service discovery. We use core DNS for the pods to know what they're doing with inside the nodes, and this is Flannel, which automatically configures networking between nodes and the control plane. Okay, cool. That sort of thing, which you don't have to worry about, is another step on top of the Kubernetes, which then does your scheduling and makes sure that stuff keeps working the way that you've configured them to, right? So it doesn't require you to configure Kubernetes the hard way. If you want to, if you really want to get into the weeds, like if you were studying for the Certified Kubernetes Administrator CK8 course, you might want to build Kubernetes the hard way, and that's the Kelsey Hightower course that you can find on GitHub, right? And that starts from basic, very sort of fundamental things of this is how you configure the networking, and this is how you layer something on top of that, and then you start this process, and but if you're looking to run workloads in a cloud native, scalable, resilient way, and you don't actively necessarily care about the nuance of specific types of configurations, you might not need to, right? So yeah, it's the abstraction of like, I want to schedule this I want to schedule this container to run. You don't care about what pod that it runs or what node that it's running on your cluster necessarily. It will keep running.
yeah. Alrighty. Well, I believe that answers the question. Let's see. This was answered. There's another question. Can we
Mm,
have separate
yeah.
worker nodes to K3s? Yep.
Yes. So you can, and so by default, your the control plane node can perform work in K3s. You can also isolate it. You can say
Hmm.
only function as a control plane node and leave all the actual running of the separate containers to your worker nodes. And you can add them, you can remove them. It's if you're manually configuring the Kubernetes cluster using K3s, it's like ridiculously clever because all you do is you on a node like, and I'm talking manually. If you're starting a virtual machine and you've downloaded K3s on it, you point it at your master node, your control plane node, with your configuration, and it will just join it, right? And then it'll start to be scheduled. It's you can add and remove them, whatever. And then multiple control planes is possible, but requires a bit of tinkering. So out of the box, K3s has a single control plane node, and it runs SQLite. In order for you to have high availability, so multiple masters and all that, you would need to switch that out to be a different key value store and make a couple of different adjustments. But yes, it's possible. If you're watching this on the Civo YouTube channel, look up Darren Shepard's talk. So Darren is the guy who originally came up with K3s. He did this amazing deep dive on including on this, where he sort of changes configurations on the fly and makes a highly available cluster within a couple of minutes. So the answer is yes and yes.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing the resources. Can you please explain the first point of misconceptions? First point was K3s is lightweight but not light on features. By the way, this talk is being recorded, so you can watch it later on as well. No problem. Is it possible to have some K8s projects? I think about Istio project service mesh. Yeah, definitely check out the CNCF projects. You can check out so many projects that use Kubernetes. If you're talking about open source, so yeah,
Yeah.
Hacktoberfest is here, so that's why many people. But one more thing, check out the Civo marketplace. Yeah, it's also open source.
So I think can you run things like the Istio service mesh right on K3s? Yes.
Yeah.
And by the way, hi David. You can run all of these sort of projects and whatever, and that's kind of the point that I was trying to make is it's because it's CNCF conformant. If you can run something on Kubernetes, you can run it on K3s as well. So you're able to add a service mesh on top of Kubernetes on K3s if you wanted to. I think I might not remember this exactly right. I think Istio requires a different ingress controller than Traffic. I might, David, please, say in the chat if that's the case. But you might have to reconfigure your cluster to use a specific requirement. But the point is that K3s, while it provides things out of the box as very good options for you to use, it does not limit you to those options. It does not limit you to using Traffic as your ingress controller. If you want to swap it out, you would have to effectively, you would have to tell it when it starts, like, please, I don't want to use this, but I would like to use something else instead. And you'll be able to configure stuff manually. And the kind of nice part about it is that starting up a new cluster takes about a couple of minutes.
Awesome. I believe that answers the question. Cool. Well, I believe we answered all the questions. So the talk is being recorded as well, so you can watch it later on. And that was it for the Civo DevOps Bootcamp. But there's a quiz for this section as well if you wanna get involved with it. Thanks, David, for the questions and your comments. So check out the link in the description for the quiz, and yeah, we'll see you in the next we do community meetups and stuff, so definitely more and more content to come. But thanks again, Kai, for joining. Really appreciate it, and yeah, have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.